Good morning, Veritas scientists. It is Wednesday, April 1st. Happy April Fool's Day. Ooh, happy April. Let's do some science. I hope you watched my videos from yesterday. We talked about weathering and erosion, and then I made a cool video. I think it's cool. Outside in the woods in my backyard of some erosion that happened to a river. So please watch that video if you haven't seen it yet, and that will help you understand erosion and weathering as we continue talking about those two things today. All right, so good job. Here we go. So this is what we talked about yesterday. We talked about weathering. The saying here at the top says, weathering breaks it, erosion takes it. And we're going to move that on today. We're going to kind of expand on what we talked about yesterday. So weathering is when forces of weather, such as wind, rain, sleet, snow, hail, etc., break off small pieces of rock from a larger piece of rock. So weathering breaks it. Weathering is when the bigger rock gets broken down into smaller pieces that break off of it. Okay? And I drew a picture here, but I'm going to get back to that picture. We'll talk about it again in a minute, so I'm not going to go through that right now. But basically, weathering breaks off those little pieces of rock. That is what weathering is the breaking off of those pieces. Okay, so I think weather causes them to break, so weathering is what caused them to break off. Okay, erosion, number 2, is when the little pieces of weathered rock move from one place to another. And that's what the video we watched yesterday, the one that I made yesterday, it showed how the river was taking those little pieces of weathered rock, right, those little pieces of sediment that broke off, those tiny, tiny little pieces. Erosion is when they are moving from one place to another. So we looked yesterday at like the riverbank, and it had soil that the water was moving down the river, right? And that soil was in the water and it was moving. So erosion was happening as the sediment or those little pieces of rock were moving down there. All right. So then I left you with this question. So we'll talk about this question and then we'll move on to today's lesson. It says, give one example of when erosion happens quickly and give one example of when weathering happens quickly. So I made a list. You should only have one because it asked you for one example of erosion and then one example of weathering. So I gave a bunch just because you probably, if I just gave you one of each, then if you had a different one, you might be unsure if that was correct. So for erosion, it usually happens very, very slowly. So my question is, when would it happen quickly? It would happen quickly if there was a landslide. Okay, if there was a landslide, there was a big hill, right? And all of the soil and the mud and the rocks and everything starts quickly sliding down that hill. That would cause erosion to happen very, very quickly. All of that soil is going to quickly move from one place to another, all right? Another example would be an avalanche, right? So that would happen during the winter time. We think of all the snow that's coming down, but underneath with that snow, a lot of soil is being brought down. There are rocks mixed into it. It's a very dangerous situation, but it is making erosion happen very quickly. Okay, another example would be a flood. If you have a big river and the banks of it get so full of water that it floods over, when that water floods up out of the riverbank, it is going to take out lots and lots of soil with it. I think I'm going to be able to find a good video of this today and about how flooding is making erosion happen really quickly. I can think of a spot in my backyard that I can show you for that. Okay, another example of erosion happening quickly would be a hurricane, right? The wind is blowing. Weathering, of course, is happening quickly with that. It's also in this list, right? But with the hurricane, that's all happening very, very quickly, right? And erosion, things are being able to move. It's rainy, and that soil is being moved quickly from one place to another, right? And the last one I put here is in a fast-moving river. If that river is moving really, really quickly, it's going to make erosion happen faster. So that will happen if there's lots of rain, if there's a flood, or even it would happen in the springtime when the snow is melting. Okay? So that's another one we can add here. Sorry that Charlie is whining. He wants to go out. Snow is melting, then there's going to be more water in the rivers, and it is going to have erosion happen quickly. Charlie, give me 3 minutes. I'll let you out. Okay? Now some examples of when weathering can happen quickly. It is a really, really slow process. Even slower generally than erosion. Weathering takes a long time for those little tiny bits of rock to break off of a big rock. That's going to take a long time. Okay? So some examples of when it would be happening quickly would be a hurricane like we talked about. Okay, the wind is blowing extra, extra hard. The rain is hitting extra, extra hard against those rocks, which is going to, that's a rock. It's going to break off little pieces. Okay? Tornado is going to make weathering happen real fast. That tornado is going to hit any rocks and it's going to break them very, very quickly. Okay? We know. Sorry. We know you want to go up. Okay, a hailstorm. I had a hailstorm last summer happen outside. I looked for a picture earlier. I couldn't find it, but hailstorm, I mean, the hail that comes out of the sky could be the size of a marble, or it could be even bigger, the size of like a golf ball. The ones I saw last summer were about the size of a marble, right? They were big, big pieces of ice that were coming out of the sky as precipitation. So if that's happening, picture a rock getting hit by these giant balls of ice that are falling out of the sky, and they're pretty heavy and they're pretty big. It's going to break off little pieces of sediment very quickly. Okay? Same thing with a flood. If the water is really rushing fast, these two are similar. In a fast-moving river, that water is going to be flowing so quickly that if there is a rock in that river and the water is really quickly going at it, it's going to break off more pieces faster than in a regular moving river. Okay? Night, Charlie. I know. Okay? So let's look at today's vocabulary, and then I have a question I want you to think about afterwards. So today's April 1st. We're talking about weathering, erosion, and sediment. So sediment are the tiny pieces of rock that break off of a larger rock through weathering. So weathering breaks it. And they land in a body of water through erosion. The erosion takes those little bits of sediment and brings them down to a body of water over time. Okay? So the saying we said yesterday, weathering breaks it and erosion takes it. Weathering breaks the rock. Okay? Breaks the big rock into little pieces. And erosion takes that sediment and brings it to a body of water. So here's an example of that. Here's a mountain. There's Mount Tom. We got a rock, a big rock at the top there. Weathering breaks it. So as the rain hits it, as the wind hits it, little pieces of sediment here are breaking off of that big rock. Okay? Erosion takes it away. As it rains, the water runs off the side of the mountain and it takes that sediment with it. So the weathering breaks it, the erosion takes it. The runoff water is bringing it down. That's making the erosion happen. And then it lands in this big pond down at the bottom. And what happens is the sediment settles to the bottom of the body of water. So picture like a lake. All of the sand and all of the soil has settled down to the bottom. Right? If it sits there for long enough, if you pour sand into a cup of water, it is going to slowly sink to the bottom because the little pieces of rock are heavier than the water is, right? So if that water's not moving, if it's just sitting there, that rock or the little pieces of weathered rock, the little pieces of sediment are going to settle down to the bottom of the water and they're going to stay there. All right? So go back if that is a little confusing to you, but I thought that this drawing was going to help. All we added was kind of the name of those little pieces of rock that break off. Those are called sediment. And we're going to continue learning more about sediment as we move through this unit. Okay? Here's 2 questions I want you to think about. We'll go over these tomorrow in tomorrow's video. Number 1, what happens to the sediment that sits at the bottom of a body of water over a very long period of time? So if you have like a lake or a pond that the water is just sitting there, what's going to happen to that sediment over a very long period of time? What's going to happen to that sediment? And number 2, what happens to the sediment that lands in a river? So a river is a little different because it is moving. So what happens to the sediment that lands in the river? If it lands in a pond or a body of water, we said it's going to sink to the bottom. So what's going to happen over a very long period of time? In a river, it's not necessarily all going to sink to the bottom. I want you to think about what's going to happen when it lands into the river. And that's it. Okay, Charlie's got to go out. He's ringing my bell over there. He's being patient. Thank you for being patient, Charlie. Okay, guys, enjoy. Watch for my video this afternoon. Have a great day. It looks like the sunshine is out. I got to get outside and enjoy some sunshine. All right, stay healthy. We'll see you soon. Thanks.